For many years, the regional bird Pokemon were laughed at as a joke. They rarely had anything unique to separate them from each other, and were all generally considered bad, especially with the normal/flying typing. While it's great for its immunity to ghosts and ground types, losing the resistance to fighting is a bad trade-off, as fighting type moves are much more common than ghost types. Not to mention how boring each of these Pokemon were from a design perspective. They were all muted and dreary colours with no sparkle or wow factor. They all looked like filthy sky rats wearing brightly coloured wigs. Seriously though, isn't it weird that they gave each bird some kind of hairstyle design? They knew their coloration was so bland that the only thing they could do to spice up their designs was to put something pretty on their heads, which clashed wildly with the rest of their uninspired designs. I don't know if I'm spoiled by living in New Zealand, but I'm used to seeing beautiful birds with rich colour palettes and lovely voices, and I regard pigeons in the same way I would a chicken. But Pokemon began to change the bird Pokemon, starting in X and Y. Fletchling was revealed in the first trailer for the first 3D entries, and it looked like a standard starter bird that you only caught because it's the first Pokemon you encountered and you have nothing else on your team. But then we saw its final form, and it was dazzling. It was a fire and flying type, which was a big deal previously. That type was only given to legendaries and one undeservedly overpopular dragon, but to see it on a regional bird was a big deal. See, fire is a great type to pair with flying, removing the ice weakness from flying and having a fire type that can't be hit by ground types, with the trade-off of a quad weakness to rock. But rock types generally aren't that offensive Pokemon, so it ends up benefiting Talonflame. What's more, they made Talonflame competitively viable, giving it a blisteringly fast speed and hard-hitting attacks like Flare Blitz, not to mention its insane ability Gale Winds. Talonflame was a monster that ripped through squishy Pokemon with no regard for its own safety. It was the definition of a glass cannon. Talonflame was and still is the greatest regional bird ever introduced. It indicated a bright future for the subgenre of Pokemon that would be later reinforced by giving Pidgeot a mega evolution, which could have been incredible with its ability No Guard. Unfortunately, the only move that benefited from No Guard was Hurricane, and if they had just given it Focus Blast so it could destroy rock and ice type Pokemon, Mega Pidgeot could have been devastating, but by not giving it any counters and making sure that Blizzard and Thunder would always hit it, it was doomed from the start. This love was followed up by Toucannon in Gen 7, and while this Pokemon is less fondly remembered than Talonflame, and it was another boring normal and flying type with a muted colour scheme with only one oddly coloured bright spot, there was still a bit of extra love put into it with a unique move, Beak Blast. But the reason Toucannon is glossed over in our memories is because it was wedged between two of the greatest flying type Pokemon to ever exist, because it brought us the instant fan favourite Corviknight. Just from a design perspective alone, it showed that Game Freak was done messing around with the regional birds. The last three had all been intimidating monsters with a look of intense fury in their beady eyes. These Pokemon were cool. If they went to school, they'd be the jocks, while Noctowl and Pelipper would be the nerds, Swallow and Unpheasant would be the smarmy losers who think they're better than everyone else, and Pidgeot and Staraptor would be the posers who acted tough but were scrubs. But Corviknight was a masterpiece of design, both artistically and in terms of gameplay, being graced with an impressive typing, ability, and a Gigantamax form, all of which served to make Corviknight a dangerously cool Pokemon. The Steel typing got rid of Flying's weakness to Ice and Rock, whilst the Flying typing eliminated Steel's weaknesses to Ground, making this a fearsome combo. Add to that an impressive bulk and the pesky Mirror Armor ability, and Corviknight soared to the upper echelons of the Pokemon Starter Bird collection. With Game Freak reaffirmed to saving this subgroup with the new intimidating designs, more fancy typing, and competitive viability, one could only imagine what the Gen 9 bird Pokemon held in store for us, but nothing could have prepared us for the answer. There was no new starter bird, at least not a clear-cut one. The starting area of Scarlet and Violet didn't have any flying types along the critical path, and no flying type was revealed pre-launch that could fill the role. Kilowattrel comes the closest to filling the role, as Squawkability, Flamigo, and Bomberda didn't have an evolution line, so I guess I can review Kilowattrel as if it's the new bird in the nest. It's okay, a unique if not forgettable Pokemon. Its typing is a plus, but other than that, there's no real pizzazz to this Pokemon. It certainly doesn't have the smouldering intensity of its peers, but it's not as atrocious as its ancestors. Overall, it's a fairly decent, if not forgettable Pokemon, making it an odd choice to seemingly fill this iconic role in the regional decks. The bird Pokemon have long been a staple of early trainers' journeys, often being one of the first Pokemon you catch on your adventure, and while this spot is rather conspicuously missing from Scarlet and Violet, I can only hope this is a one-time stumble, and that Gen 10 will get us back on track with some phenomenal starting bird Pokemon. I'll be back in 2 days. In the meantime, here's a video about why random encounters weren't such a bad thing in JRPGs.